Hello,
Hello.
and first of all, welcome to you, Ulrik Wagner, Associate
Thank you.
Professor in Sports Sociology here at NEX. And in this series, I will try to focus on cycling and science. And you could say personally, and most of the publications that we focus on the elite athlete. But you have this very interesting paper where you focus on the recreational active, or we also have a picture here where it's not that active on the coach, on the so-called MAMIL.
Mm.
And
somehow it's about the interplay between elite cyclists and then the cycling for all or sport for all segment, and part of it is what we here define as the middle-aged men in Lycra. That's basically the focus of this paper.
Yeah, and it takes its offspring from a commercial, which is, so to say, a commercial for watching the Tour de France, which was a commercial, and there will be links in the comments here where you can find the commercial. It's a quite narrow break, and the picture from in the lower left is from that one. But it's, so to say, it also focuses on the irony that people dress up in the same clothes as the professional here with the TMB or as the polka dot jersey. Is that something which is special for cycling, and is it special for middle-aged men? We may touch upon that, but maybe you could take us through the analysis that you did of the commercial.
Yeah, it's basically an advertisement that was launched by the national broadcaster and public service broadcaster TV2 that each year broadcasts the Tour de France. And prior to the 2021, they launched this short commercial or advertising where they used the MAMIL, the middle-aged men in Lycra, and added a component of irony to the phenomena. So it was quite interesting for us to see how do they actually introduce these middle-aged men who dress up in Lycra, who try to imitate, and you can see the pictures here, imitate the elite athletes. In this case, it's it's containing some of the jerseys from the golden age of Danish cycling in 1990s. But you also know the middle-aged men in Lycra today, more or less dressing up in fashionable dress that is not necessarily linked to specific teams. So they use this this commercial. They created this commercial where they ironized some of the aspects that we know from the MAMIL here. For instance, that they try to look like the elite athletes, they behave in a certain way, and they somehow try to balance this irony by occasionally ridiculing the middle-aged men in Lycra. So as you introduced before, dressing up like the elite is not something that is unique to cycling. You see it in football, you see it in other sports as well. But here you see it's also where you yourself perform something. You act as if you have some kind of similarities with the elite. And it's also constrained to men from the MAMIL concept here. It's middle-aged, but specifically also relying to, or referring to the dress, the Lycra, this kind of dress that is narrow and fitting closely to the body, and also then exposing your body composition, for instance.
And do you think that is linked to that it's Lycra and it's close fitting and you shave your legs and so on? Because you also have some consideration about masculinity in this context. Because if we jump to one of the pictures that I have chosen, and actually now it's a little longer down in the here. I mean, it's in many sports you dress up like the elite. So when you go and watch football, I mean, it's normal that you dress up in the team suit, or here in the national Danish team. Whereas when you go play on the ground, as in the lower right here, maybe you don't dress up like that. but there's seldomly an irony. I mean, we seldomly question that you wear a jersey of your favorite team. Is
No,
that different
I
from let's say football to soccer, you think?
Yeah, I think one of the differences is related to space. And if you look at the pictures here, you see people dressed with the national jersey of the football team when they enter the stadium as fans, as consumers, or
Yeah.
they dress up in certain situations where they are in a limited space that is only for football, that is on the pitch. What is different with the MAMIL is they use the same roads where you have recreational cyclists or people who are using the bikes for transportation. And that is where it becomes this contrast between what we call ordinary cyclists compared to the MAMIL, the man in the his middle-aged period of life who dresses up like a professional and younger athlete, also spending quite significantly sums of money on buying the equipment, for instance, a carbon racer and so on. So that
Do you
is
think it's because it becomes very visible in the
it
public space?
It is, and it is also something that has become increasingly visible during the last 15 years, 20 years perhaps. So you actually needed something, you needed a concept to define these men. And it's also a limited group of people, contrary to football. You see from here, it's kids, it's older people, it's consumers of all ages and also across gender. So when it's about MAMIL, it is a quite limited and focused group of people. And for instance, when you use the word MAMIL, it is gendered. It's men. They are middle-aged, and they are very conspicuous in the way they consume and dress and so on. So I think
But
that
do
is
you think that is because that it's just lacking behind? Because if we go to this picture here, I mean, that I brought because, I mean, is this confined to the middle-aged man? I mean, we start to see more women, but maybe there's a difference there that they don't tend to dress up like even this old guy down here. He dresses up in a team equipment, whereas the women seem to choose more neutral dresses, which also has become a segment for males. There's many of these buying paranormal suits. Rafa has made some collection that are more, you could say, they don't just replicate the elite teams, but they are more like a fancy segment.
Yeah, it is. I think it's worth emphasizing that mammals might be an ideal type. And if you look at mammals, it's quite a lot. It is one segment is the ones you mentioned here, where it's very fashionable without references to professional teams, and it's also there's a trend in color and so on, and also prices. And on the other hand, you have those people who are looking perhaps a little bit more trying to imitate professional teams, wearing old outfits and so on. So it is that there's quite a dispersion between what is a MAMIL today, but the ideal is that it's those people who are wearing Lycra, driving fancy bicycles, but not necessarily wearing a TVM T-shirt or let's say Jumbo Visma or something.
No.
And,
But
and of
in the
course,
commercial and in the irony, they ironize this that they one-to-one try to replicate the idols that they watch. And then they also link it closely. You go on bicycle and then you go directly to the couch and watch your heroes.
Yeah. That is somehow the irony, saying, well, they spent the first 2 or 3 or 4, or let's say, I think it's the first 8 spots on showing how dedicated the middle-aged men are here in imitating the elite. But then once the transmission actually start, you will fall asleep. So that is somehow the irony, but also a way of showing that at the end of the day, you are basically not like the elite. You have perhaps prior to the transmission of the daily tour stage been driving 60, 80 kilometers. And once the transmission start, then you fall asleep. And this is also a little bit of playing with the Danish language here, because there's you say Tour de France, but in Danish you have Lure de France, which Lure in this case means a nap. So it is a phenomenon that some of us who are aware of the Danish peculiarities and the Danish language, we can refer to that. So it is a way of saying, well, there is a limit to the imitation of the elite. You are actually human at the end of the day. You are a middle-aged man who will need the nap while watching the Tour de France that you obviously adore and admire.
And do you think that this ironizing, is that also stigmatizing, so that it will disclose some people from going into this because they think it looks ridiculous? And maybe that's the trend why people turn to more of these neutral dresses. And if we have this picture, we can also see that the MAMIL concept has even been translated into a, you could say, somewhere in the bridge between that. They accept that this is a concept, but it's more made into a fancy dress and as a concept. Because you could say, for me, as also being interested in public health and the effects that people do regularly, physical activity, not only in an elite settings, and then you could say if watching Tour de France or watching a football game can inspire people to become active, I mean, that's a dream scenario. But do you think that with this, both the framing of it, but also that this Lycra thing is, so to say, a little, you could, now it's with the new gender definitions and so on, but it's a little in contrast to the masculinity of going out and working hard. Could that be something that would scare people away from becoming active?
I think that is actually the core of irony, that it is enabling the observer, but also the person that carries out the ironic statements, to say two things at the same time. And it's always a contradicting message. So on the one hand, it is embracing the middle-aged man who wears Lycra and is actively and physically engaged and committed. But at the same time, it is also a way of distancing towards this phenomenon, making some ridicule of the person here. So that is actually the very, very core of irony, that you can say two things at the same time, and it becomes very context dependent on how you interpret it. I guess most Danes who will watch this advertising will immediately understand what is referred to here. They meet, if they go on a recreational or transportation bike lane, you will be annoyed by those people thinking that they are in the middle of Tour de France right now, but at the same time you somehow admire them for their commitment. So the irony it's double-sided. It's a two. So it's about balancing on a very, very narrow edge, because you can somehow step out of the balance here, and then it becomes either rude or not understandable or whatever. But at the same time, it once you find the balance here, you can appeal to some people, for instance, men here, saying, well, it is quite normal that I'm tired after riding a little bit, but still there is a kind of humor here which will attract me to become an active cyclist more than just a recreational cyclist here. On the other hand, it is also can be stigmatizing here, because there's a really thin balance between being stigmatized and being admired or adored here.
And how is it with this evidence of elite creating also a broader attraction to? It's not that strong. So if you have, it's conceived that, when you go and do sports, it's playing, it's being a kid again. So that's normal, but people tend to drop out. And then you could say, okay, if we then catch them back as mammals, then we can say, okay, from a public health perspective, that can be quite attractive.
Yeah. Actually, the evidence that once you have the elite, perhaps a successful elite, this will have a trickling down effect to, let's say, broader segments of society. This is a myth. if this would be the case, then handball and let's say badminton would be very, very popular games in this country, because that's where we have some highly successful elite athletes, male as women. But that's not the case. It's those sport disciplines that currently suffer a lot from let's say loss of members and less engagement. So the irony here is also a way of saying, well, perhaps there's another link between elite and broader segments here. You can lend some of the elements, let's say using the fashion from elite sport, some of the tokens like expensive bikes and so on, but it is also something else. It's not there's not a direct transfer here, so you can ironize this relation between elite and broader segments, and then it becomes perhaps more performative, more productive, because it enables us to translate the difference between elite and broader segments.
But
and
what
then,
I sometimes I hear from some of the, I should disclaim that I'm a cyclist myself and has been riding in a club. And what I've heard is from many of those participating as, you could say, MAMILs recreational, they find it very motivating that you, in contrast to football, for example, football players, these guys, they will never play with the elite. In cycling, you can actually, I mean, in our club, you can have a 50-year-old recreational MAMIL coming up, and he can actually follow the best out of the city. And of course, when they start riding fast, he cannot follow them, but he can still train with the elite. And they tend to find that motivating. And likewise, you could also say, as you said, mentioning buying the same bicycle as the elite and so on. So it's you somehow in cycling, also as a spectator, you come much closer to the sport. Do you see that is something that we could benefit from in terms of motivating people into this, or is it still?
Yeah, and personally, as being one of the MAMILs myself, but unlike you, not a former member of a cycling club, but coming from a low-skill background in triathlon, but it has some similarities in terms of space. So if you watch, for instance, one of the mountain stages in Tour de France, the spectators are very close to the riders. Sometimes too close, one could say, but you don't have these frames and constraints that you see in football. For instance, you need to go to the stadium, or you need to only be 11 players on the pitch, and that's it. In cycling, for instance, also in triathlon, you can occasionally compete on exercise with the very elite, or at least follow them some kilometers. And I think this kind of intimacy is different in cycling from, let's say, more standardized ball games like handball, football, and so on, where you also have specific facilities for it. In cycling, you use the landscape, whether that's small slopes in Denmark, or mountains in France, or windy areas in Flanders. It's in my perception a bit fairly more democratic, and at the same time you can actually buy the same equipment as the elite. It's not a coincidence that the year after Tour de France, most of the producers, whether it be Cannondale or Trek or whatever, they launch models that are looking similar, are equipped with the same newest technology that was tested during the previous Tour de France or Giro d'Italia. So there is a kind of an intimate relation between ordinary consumers or practitioners and the elite that you do not really find in sports like football, where there's seems to be a bigger distance between elite and broader popular segments.
And this thing about replicating the elite is, of course, especially for the equipment, very attractive. But you could also say this broadening of the clothing, whereas I would never buy a polka dot or a team jersey, because for me, it would be like a cultural appropriation that you, so to say, take something which is not yours. So I would always ride either in a neutral dress or in my club dress, which is, so to say, my own. And there you could say, okay, since that might be stigmatizing, I think that the availability of equipment will maybe broaden the MAMIL concept, both in terms of not keeping people away from that, but also in terms of age and gender, that it will spread out and without having any evidence other than simple observation. I would tend to see that the female choose less of replicating. For them, it might be more of a recreational activity. But still, is it because they replicated? Are they somehow similar to this? I mean, or is it just that they tend also to pick this as an exercise mode?
No, and I should actually add, and this is also based purely on my own anecdotal evidence from riding the roads around Copenhagen. You tend to see more and more females actually driving. There's a growing, and thank God for that, emphasis on the elite cycling for women. But of course, once people adopt an activity, they also translate it. So for many years, it has been by, let's say, more wealthy segment of Danish society or in international societies has been translated by people that saying, well, this is where we can show a kind of a conspicuous consumption, that we are able to buy clothes in a certain way. Perhaps another group of, let's say, women, they do it in another way. So they drive, they exercise quite a lot, but perhaps it's more translated into a health, but also social activity discourse, rather than it's about conspicuous consumption and showing your personal wealth or whatever it is.
Yeah.
We don't really know yet.
No, but we could guess that the increased professionalism of female cycling, more showing on television of the females Tour de France, etc., could have one segment from that. But otherwise, I tend to agree with you that, of course, there are the females who have been driven in through the clubs, which is a very small fragment, both for women and males of being active cyclists. But some of them could also come from the fitness spinning, they have been doing this, and then they want to go outside, and maybe then they will not tend to look at the professional cyclist and replicate them, but rather choose clothing in a more you could say
and perhaps there are a lot of good reasons why they should not imitate, let's say, male cycling, because on the one side we have, let's say, successful winning athletes like Jonas Vingegaard, but you also have previously a lot of successful riders like Bjarne Riis, Rolf Sørensen, who along their career also were heavily engaged in using doping and prohibited performance-enhancing drugs and so on. So there are also some limitations why you should perhaps not imitate these so-called role models. So it is about finding new role models. If you take a good example, Cecilie Ludwig, perhaps the best female rider at the moment in Denmark. A lot of her communication once during interviews has been about female empowerment. It's also about challenging the male dominance in many of the cycling clubs, organized cycling. So it is at the same time she is an ambassador of female empowering, and that is also perhaps one of those persons from whom we will see the effect in the coming years, in upcoming generations of female cyclists.
Yeah, no, and replicating the elite is not always adorable, especially in some of these extreme and with the doping area, of course, very extreme. But I agree with you that the female aspects and being role models, showing that females can also be tough athletes could be inspiring. But as you said, maybe there's not that strong evidence. I just think that my observation from cycling is there's a more close to one that watching and doing the activity, also because the watching it is something that takes longer time, whereas it's more rare that people directly go play a recreational football match and then go to the stadium and watch or go and watch it on television. There's a closer link there from the activity. And maybe also because it's easier to do it self-organized. I mean, if you have to play football, you need to organize and have 11 players, or at least enough to have some smaller teams. Whereas in cycling, you can do it on your own, or you can do it in very small groups, self-organized.
Yeah, the potential of cycling is actually its simplicity. It is quite, most of the generations in this country will learn how to cycle. It's a mean for transportation. Young kids will learn it very early in their life, and of course then the transfer towards becoming a more, let's say, road adopt as dope cycling is actually quite near. Whereas football, you need to somehow fit into frames. Although there are efforts to say, well, making ordinary recreational football more accessible for a lot of people is also carried out these days. But then it's less standardized. You can actually do it on your own, as you said before. You can use the landscape. You do not need a membership of a club in order to just say, well, let's go cycling.
And you can say in Denmark, of course, we are brought up with cycling. Most kids get a cycling. They learn to cycle in Holland, in China, and so on. There are some countries, but I guess it's also spreading. I mean, we now see that in the UK, for example, that it starts getting something that you see in the picture. Whereas in Denmark, it might go a little in the other direction because more and more people are living in the big cities, and there it's more difficult
it is
and
actually
dangerous to cycling.
One of the alarming elements is that the coming up generations, you'll see a tendency towards fewer and fewer kids being able to cycle. Whereas for 20 years ago, it was a must-have. Today, it is. You will find a minority who do not really cycle because you have, you can use public transportation. If you live in a country like in a city like Copenhagen, you have the metro all the time. You have other means of transportation, and a growing tendency that parents actually drive their kids in cars. So it is under challenge right now, whereas perhaps in other countries you will see the opposite. You see a negative decline in areas like Denmark.
But still, one of the main comments we get when we have forest visitors or tourists here in Copenhagen is, "Oh, all of you bicycle," and I mean it's seldom that you see that.
Of course,
whereas we're used to it, and if we go to Amsterdam and in the Netherlands, we are used to see that, but it's confined to some cities, whereas it's more rare if you go to Athens or Rome and so on. Maybe due to the both the environmental settings, it's hotter, it's more difficult to do, so on. But I think it's spreading, and maybe more, as you see, as a sporting, a recreational activity rather than for pure transport. But it's quite clear that from a public health perspective, that if we understand what is it that drives people to take their bikes in terms of this, it has huge implication. And that was why I thought it was also interesting in this link from being inspired from the elite, replicating them as the MAMIL, as you said, is a concept of. I mean, if you just do it for transport, we normally do it in our normal bikes, in our normal outfit. We don't choose specific outfits.
And I guess that's one of the reasons why you can explain the appearance of a specific concept like mammals, is because you needed some kind of conceptualization to describe this other kind of cyclists, not the ones that you described there where you drive in your ordinary clothes on an ordinary bike on your way between home and your work, or some more recreational things. You needed to describe something that was actually targeting this specific group of middle-aged men in a specific clothes, imitating the elite, perhaps by shaving your legs and so on, but also illustrating and exposing a conspicuous consumption that is signalizing something. And I don't think it is a coincidence that you compare cycling like the MAMIL cycling today with golf, because it is attractive to the upper middle class men, but as with all other phenomena, this can change gradually. It can be reinterpreted by females, by other segments. So it is actually the dynamic that we are currently witnessing.
No, but it's quite, I mean, I guess from a sociological perspective, it's quite funny to watch how different sports they have their habits. And I mean, for golf, I mean, you would say, oh, why do you have to wear this funny kind of fancy looking dress? Likewise, if you look at the MAMIL, okay, does it have to be Lycra? Okay, is it only the aerodynamic shaving legs? I mean, it's something where it's very special for the sports, but I guess it is for many sports. And for us, when you have been part of the sport for a long time, it, so to say, becomes normal practice. And that is what I think is what they in the app for the sporting event uses to say, okay, look at this. This is not normal.
Now, it is actually interesting what you say here, because the two of us, and perhaps maybe even more you, we are getting institutionalized into this. We take this for granted. We are not finding it funny or mysterious when men shave their legs, because that's the institutionalized practice in a lot of cycling. But whereas if I explain this to some of my friends who do not have nothing to do with sport, and I say, well, you shave legs, their immediate association will be, well, is this kind of a more homosexual appearance, or is it a more attractive to something that is a more female way of doing it? Because the ordinary, let's say, broad perception of shaving legs is that this is it's not related to masculinity. But whereas for those of us who are closer to a little bit to cycling, shaving leg is standard procedure.
But that was nice that there was actually hardcore evidence that it improves your aerodynamics. So then you don't need to.
But don't overestimate that kind of evidence. I think there's a cultural aspect of it as well.
Oh yeah, indeed, as well. So to say. No, but it was nice to shed a little light on both the paper here and also some different aspects of going from elite cycling to the broad recreational. And there's also evidence that when people are active, they tend to choose more recovery. So there's an actual background for why he is falling asleep on the couch afterwards.
Yes.
But thank you for introducing us and taking us through some of the different aspects of this focus on the MAMIL and the irony of dressing up like the elite. Thank you very much, Ulrik.
Yeah, thank you.